Hi there. Now, as a professional genealogist, I often get asked if I can help somebody to find their very recent ancestors, maybe even a parent, if they're adopted or the parent has, gone missing, or a grandparent. And so these are very often uh, 20th century searches. And I have to say, but when I get asked these questions, my heart often sinks because it's really not that easy. It may be easy if you know your parents, if you knew your grandparents, then it's going to be easy to start finding them in the available records. But if you don't know where if maybe your parents have died and you don't know where they were born, if they disappeared or died, or you're adopted and you don't know anything about them. This makes things very difficult. You'd think that 20th century research would perhaps be easier than 19th century research. It's really not the case, mainly because there are laws about how available records should be if it's thought that a person might be still living. So, of course, a lot of records back to the mid-20th century are just not available. So this means that sort of more or less after about the beginning of World War II period, it's much more difficult to find ancestors than it is much earlier, particularly the 19th century. The 19th century is usually a dream to research because you've got all the census records, you've got the parish records available, and that's pretty straightforward. But 20th century records, not so much. So how do we get round this? Well, there are a few records available in the 20th century, but the most helpful ones tend to be in the earlier part of the 20th century. So the latest census we can look at is the 1921 census. Currently, this is only available on the FindMyPast website. You can search the indexes, but when you actually want to view, you do have to pay, or you can do a subscription, but it is definitely a paid for service. But the latest, most useful record is the 1939 register, which is similar to a census, so it's not quite the same. It's more like a survey that the government undertook at the beginning of World War II, so that they could organise ration books and identity cards, etc. And if you can find an ancestor on the 1939 register, if the person you're looking for was born before then it will give you an exact date of birth, but not a place of birth and an address. But there's two difficulties with that. If you have a very common name and you don't know where they were living, then it's going to be very difficult to find them anyway. Also, if that person is still living, then you're unlikely to find them on the 1939 register, because anyone thought to be still living, those records are closed. So on the actual registers, when you view them, there's a blank line, a blacked out line for anyone thought to be still living. So they won't come up in the indexes anyway. So those are the difficulties with those records. So what can you do with records later than that? Well, the World War II records, up until recently, most of these have been closed unless you can prove that you are a direct descendant, which again is difficult if you don't really know. But they are beginning, because the 75-year rule is more or less over. Those records are beginning to trickle through into the National Archives. So you might try looking for World War II records on the National Archives website, but I think there are some too on the Ancestry website. But again, if the person you're looking for wasn't in that war or was a child during that war, wasn't even born yet, it's going to be even more difficult. So what you are left with mainly are civil registration records and electoral register records. Now, civil registration are birth, marriage and death registers. So again, this is going to be difficult if the name you're looking for is a fairly common one, and if you have no idea of age or place, that can make things very difficult. But if they have a quite unusual name, then you might try those records. The other thing you can look at are electoral registers. Now, you can find these, most of these on Ancestry, but also you can try the 192.com website, which does tend to have more up-to-date electoral registers if you're looking for a living relative. But again, if it's a common name and if you don't know where they might be living, that's going to make it difficult. So you can see that searching for living relatives or relatives who might have passed on, but you're not absolutely sure, who are living in the 20th century, it's very, very difficult unless you have some idea of where they might be living, where they were born, some idea of dates. And a lot of it might be trial and error, and you can spend a lot of money ordering, say, birth or marriage certificates and then finding they're the wrong person. One more thing you might try, if you're really desperate to find a person, is to do DNA testing. I'm not a great expert on DNA, but it is becoming a really big thing for people searching a birth parent, say if they're adopted. Because when you do a DNA test, the results get put on a database, and then you can get matched up with other people who have the same DNA and have the same ancestors. So you can try, if you get a match with somebody who isn't obviously somebody, a relative that you already know might be from a known relative, then you can try working with them to try and work back to see where you have a common ancestor. It's not quite as easy as it sounds, and I've had people come to me when they've had matched DNAs, they're trying to find the common ancestor, and it's really not that easy, but it can be done. I have had some success with that, but it's not always that easy. So that's it really. 20th century research, not easy unless you have a real strong idea about places, dates, etc. And if you have a fairly unusual name to search for. So if none of the records up to the 1921 census, 1939 registers, civil registration, electoral registers, if you cannot find anything on those records, then do try DNA testing. So I hope that has helped answer some of the questions for some of you who may be looking for 20th century ancestors or are trying to look for living relatives, birth parents, etc. If you have any further questions, do please ask in the comments. I will try and answer as much as I can. For more questions and answers, then please subscribe and I will endeavour to help you more with your ancestry questions. Bye for now.